Good afternoon, everyone. We are very honored and fortunate to have this really distinguished panel with us. On my right hand, obviously, we don't need a further introduction for Gary, for Mr. Wang, and also Mr. Xu. We just heard two really fascinating, stimulating 5 stars. So I would like to give each of you 2 minutes, see what is your comments, response for those very fascinating thoughts from history to the future. Gary, you start.
Well, I thank our 2 fire starters. I agree completely with what they've said. Global trade is important. We've all won by trading with each other and playing to our natural strengths. And if we're going to be in a trade war, and I'm not exactly sure we are in a trade war, I'd say we may be having a little skirmish, not a war. There will be no winners. There will only be losers in that situation. And ultimately, we have to just understand that to coexist and grow the globe and create job opportunities and wealth creation opportunities for everyone and make sure that we bring the lower class up, we have to trade with each other. We have to share goods and services. One thing that we don't talk a lot about when we're talking about this whole trade situation, we tend to talk about goods, and we tend to talk about balance of trade and goods. We don't talk about it in jobs and how many jobs have been exported around the world. That's a huge phenomena that real-time connectivity and real-time communications have created. And we were given a 30-year perspective, and that's really an interesting perspective because in the last 30 years, you're able to have employees anywhere in the world connected to each other. So you take a city like Bangalore, which is back office to many of the largest companies in the world today, millions of jobs created there because they can be connected. That's another form of trade that goes under the radar screen, but it really helps develop a country, India, but it also helps companies around the world grow by getting resources in other parts of the world. So I'm in complete agreement with our 2 panelists on trade, the necessity of trade, the necessity to work it out, the necessity for countries to treat each other fairly, and for all countries to open up to each other.
That's good, yeah. Mr. Wang, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we are really facing a very dangerous crossroad now. The world is really at a crossroad, and we see the populism, protectionism is really rampant. And so what I think will lead that actually is that, of course, the trade has been really had a free ride for the last 75 years since Second World War, and that produced many times of wealth, prosperity, and flat world. However, that has now, we are coming at the crossroad is that deglobalization is really taking hold now. What I think that one of the problems was that the global governance is falling behind global practice because the infrastructure U.S. has set up in the Second World War is not enough to cope with the existing challenges and difficulties. For example, the World Bank has just released the World Bank report on global value chain. In the 80s and the 70s, 80% of the product produced was of the country of origin. Now, 70–80% of the product was produced by different countries altogether. So, for example, it's made by China is not really made by world. And if really, but then how we share that benefit, multinationals and also host country and home country has to really work hard. So global governance is not coped with this kind of new phenomena. I think that's really one of the reasons. Second is I think that we really have to work really hard is that to cope with anti-globalization sentiment. For example, 1% of the wealth, sometimes in many countries, is larger than the 90% of the population combined. So that's really not really a good result of this globalization. It's not inclusive. So we need to really get that ratified. I think that is really important. Finally, I would like to make a few, just very quickly, my comments. I think we need to strengthen the people-to-people exchanges anywhere between China and the U.S. as well. Second, China just launched the foreign investment law, I think, which is very good. China should continue to be open wider and faster and higher. And that to welcome all the foreign company comes in without any restriction. Thirdly, I think global governance we need to design. For example, TPP is a good example that has really done well of 11 countries. Why can't we get TPP go global and then it's always open, welcome China and the US to come back and to join that. And also we can, conclude RCEP. We may even have a FTAP for Asia Pacific. And really, I think we need to change our narrative.
Thank you. Mr. Xu.
Insistence is not because of strong, but we have another choice. It is said by the Winston Churchill. I speak Chinese. Is 我们这个坚持啊，不是因为我们有多强壮，
are insisting because we are not because we are strong.
No, that's okay.
我看到这个世界是平的嘛。
I see that the title is The World Flat and
这句话呢，让我想
the
起来
Protectionism and Populism review creators. This reminds us that when we were young, we thought that the world was flat, but when we grow older, we know that the world is actually a round place. So if you look at Beijing and Los Angeles, in a map, it's actually flat, but on the globe, it's actually a round area. So it's the same in the economic life. Trade protectionism and free trade. Since the inception of the free trade theory, these two ideas have existed, and the rise or decrease in influence at different times. When there's need, there's free trade and globalization, which went upper hand when we develop to a certain stage. When the impact is adverse in terms of economy to a country, then there will be rising protectionism. And today, we are faced with these issues. We have no more choices. We have to confront it in a better way and try to find a solution to the problems or endure this periodic issue.
So we all agree trade is important, so we need to promote the further strong trade and globalization. We all agree. I think it's good. Fred made this very clear. US and China should sign a trade deal, even phase one, as soon as possible. So Gary, you were in White House. Tell us, when will both US and China will be able to sign a deal?
So I've been gone from the White House for a while, so no one should take anything I say as White House speaking. But look, I think it is in both sides' best interest to sign phase one immediately. Phase one is an agricultural deal for the United States, where the United States will return to exporting agricultural products back to China with some market access for US companies into China. That's a win-win for both countries and something that I think should be done immediately. The farmers in the US are suffering. China needs to buy the agricultural products. They'll buy it from somebody.
Right.
It's not like China's buying something they don't need. So the US might as well be the supplier of choice, and getting access for US companies into China is something that US companies have been trying to do now for 20 plus years.
Yeah,
So to me, this is an easy thing to get done.
Yeah, it's easy thing to be done, but we still take a years. We cannot reach agreements. Why is that? Why both sides cannot sit down and sign deal?
Well, as I think everyone's acutely aware, that we didn't break, or they didn't break, the trade agreement into phases till recently. I think they were trying to negotiate an all-encompassing trade deal, including agriculture as well as intellectual property. I think the problems really stem out of the intellectual property part of the discussion, where the Americans feel that there has been substantial forced technology transfer, substantial copyright infringement, that's happened in China. You can't put that back. You can't make that disappear, but the US would like protection going forward, which is a lot of what we've been talking about here. We've been talking about the new technology revolution, the new technology Iron Curtain. I think everyone understands that having a level playing field in the world of technology is in everyone's best interest, but the US cannot be the creator of intellectual property. That's what we create and need to sell to the world. China can create goods and sell them to the rest of the world. We'll pay for the goods as long as China pays for the intellectual property.
No, IP protection is an important issue, and in China, President Xi announced a big open policy in the board last year, and also emphasized the protection for the IP issues. So, Mr. Wang, how do you see the progress in China in these areas, and what China can do more?
You're right. Absolutely. I think the President Xi has emphasized not only abroad, but also recently at the China Import-Expo in Shanghai. I think there's a lot of progress has been really taking place that is largely undetected probably by global media. Is that, for example, China Premier League actually announced in Davos this year that all the foreign investment will be open a year ahead of the year of the schedule. And now you have 100% ownership now in China. We have a lot of stories now. Tesla has a 100%, BMW increased to 75% ownership. There's many stories happening, Standard & Poor's coming to China. So we're expecting a flood of actually foreign investment and the foreign financial sector to come in. And then furthermore, I think also that has been unnoticed in the Western media is China has just this year in March passed the new foreign investment law. And in that law, it stipulates that there's no, should not be allowed forced technology transfer, should not be allowed IPR violation. If violated, it will be severely punished, no matter who, government official included. Thirdly, is also all foreign companies should be treated equal. And then they recently, last month, the implementation detail of this law has been circulating among the multinational AmCham European chambers, and by January 1st, this will be coming into play. So this is really exactly addressing the structural concerns that our American friends have. So I think we have a lot of things that done already.
A lot of progresses. So, Mr. Xi, does trade fraction impact on your business? You do a lot of international business trades, cross-border transactions.
Sure.
Yes, indeed. It does have some impact on companies, but I feel that China-US trade frictions, well, the impact is not just on the large companies in China. In particular, for the private sector companies, the impact is also not small, because China, the exporting companies in China, for instance, home appliance companies, furniture companies, they're there. And for the large SOEs, their export to the US is not so large as a share of their total. And this has an impact on Chinese companies and on foreign companies. The whole world is actually uneasy about the turbulence brought by the China-US trade frictions.
Same thing. US-China should sign deal as soon as possible. But at this particular moment, Fred, are you optimistic or you're pessimistic about the deal coming soon?
Well, by nature, I'm an optimist. It's difficult, it's challenging.
For this particular issue, are you?
I'm sorry?
For this particular issue.
Of the trade dispute.
Trade deal, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm an optimist. Just as Gary pointed out, right, it's definitely in two countries' interest. A protracted war is lose-lose for everyone and for the world economy as collateral damage. So that will be incentive powerful enough for us to end this fight. I would also just make a quick comment. Obviously, we couldn't know what ultimately Washington. The politics in place, or the personalities in place to end this trade fight. But I think, as far as China is concerned, my conviction is that we should go unilateralist. What do I mean? Unilateralist, learn from America. However, not by raising tariffs. I feel a little bit soul-searching. When the first shot of trade war happened last year. We obviously, understandably, human nature, responded by using our own tariff. It's like Washington shot at their own one foot, and we shot at the other foot in the name of retaliation. So we should, this kind of tit for tat, retaliatory tariff, I think is counterproductive. We're better off unilaterally reducing our tariff rates, removing non-tariff trading barriers, open up markets further for foreign trade and investment, and importantly, improve our record of IP protection. On IP specifically, it's such a light rotten issue. The fact is China has made significant, tremendous progress on IP protection. Why? If any doubt in Washington, because China itself has emerged as an innovator. So we have skin in the game, our interests are aligned. If China ignores IP protection, China will never become a world-class innovative nation. So we are aligned, and I think actually we can get the deal done.
The progress of China is making an open policy, including open international competition and also IP protection. In this particular moment, are you optimistic about the deal coming soon, or you're not?
Look, I'm optimistic about a phase one deal coming.
Phase one deal.
Yeah, phase one I think is a relatively easy deal to get done. Phase two, I think, is much more difficult to get done. But I pick up on something Fred said. You know, look, China has become much more of a technology-driven country over the last decade or two, and I think Bill Gates said it yesterday. You know, he was visiting the Microsoft Center here on AI, and he doesn't know if it's Chinese technology or American technology. Technology is technology. But if you think of what's going on in China today, in some areas, their technology is probably way ahead of where the United States is. I would think that China's at the point in their evolution that they would want IP protection as well, because they're now starting to develop some real cutting-edge intellectual property, and they don't want the rest of the world stealing it from them.
No, that's very true, because we, the Chinese, grow up the value chain, IP protection become ever important, exactly as you said. But you also mentioned the technology and innovation movements in China. And we also observe the trade fraction more move to the tech fraction now. And Diana, are you really concerned about the trade fraction will move to tech fraction?
Absolutely.
Do you see things moving to that direction?
We have to acknowledge and be honest with ourselves that this is an all-encompassing geopolitical confrontation between the existing superpower and the aspiring one. And trade, if you'd like, is the least contentious issue. Certainly intellectual property rights, I'll agree, Gary, and also opening China's financial sector. But when it comes to tech, it gets really difficult, because in no other point in history before this, when we've had these confrontations between an existing and an aspiring superpower, were we in a position of having a technology, especially with the deployment of 5G, that will weaponize how economic structures work. And I'm not talking about weaponizing tariffs. What I'm talking about is that if I ask every single one of you in the room here, would the US have been buying the bulk of its military equipment from the Soviet Union during the Cold War? Well, the answer would be, I'm sure, unanimous. And yet, in the future, if we actually manage to build it, because of course this decoupling will slow innovation and technology, we could be in a position where just turning off someone's electricity system is a weapon. Compromising communication channels is a weapon. So on the technology front, I really don't see, I see probably 5% chance of the US and China actually agreeing common technology, global digital standards. Let me just tell you one other thing, though.
You mentioned 5% chance for both US and China to work out a common technology standard. That was quite scary and concerning for everyone in this room, I'm sure, because the world cannot stand for two different tech standards. I think this is obviously. What can we do, Mr. Wang?
Well,
to narrow this issue?
Absolutely, this is really dangerous. The trade was, I think, on the surface, but really the digital and the technology divide, that's really going to hurt and divide the world into two camps. And that's going to put us all into primitive days, and we'll lower the productivity, and we'll suffer probably even great recessions. For example, if we can use the 5G of Huawei, which is the most advanced, applicable many times in China, perfect many times, the most advanced technology. And then even Nokia or Ericsson, their 5G equipment was still made in China, if they think of an alternative. So if we don't use that, then we'll be so many generations behind. But does that mean in the future Chinese people don't want to use Boeing? I mean, maybe there's a bug in the plane, Or all the US GM Ford sells more cars in China than the United States. Chinese people refuse to ride on the US-made cars. So this is ridiculous if we think about it, if we really widen that into this kind of narrative or mentality. Then we're really in the tech war, and then there will be cyber war, there will be a currency war, talent war, and then the world will be finished, and then we may not have a military war, but we will have many times over by those kind of different type of wars.
We don't want to get all those wars, that's very true. Commercially, the chip market have a roughly $480 billion per year. China imported roughly 310 billion. So if there's a trade fraction stop the chip export to China, I think the whole global chip industry will immediately broke down. So there's a huge commercial and a business interest in there. So business community is really don't want to see that happen. But Fred, you do a lot of investments in the tech sector in both the US and China. How do you see these issues? How do you see we can try to solve these issues and prevent this tech war happen?
Right. So clearly, we're in unprecedented times. There's a really gathering dark clouds on the horizon, facing the technology sector and the relation between US and China. I will have just 3 quick points. First of all, technology, is really, China has been making a lot of progress in terms of closing the gap with the US, but the US remains the undisputed global leader in science and technology overall. So what I worry is that right now there's a bit of paranoia, in the policy circle, certainly in Washington, so that may misguide some of the policies they're having, number one. Number two, we are, thanks in part to US, being a champion of global trading system, there's, global supply chain, very elaborate, sophisticated, and dedicated. So yes, China may have some success in hardware gadgets, including Huawei, but 90% of chips are imported from the US, and all the software OS are from the US. So it's kind of symbiotic mutual dependence to force decoupling. Yes, in the short term, China will take a hit, but also hurt the US semiconductors and software companies.
It is one tech supply chain indeed. Gary, are you concerned about tech war in addition to the trade war?
Look, I think the trade war is going to morph into a tech war. That's where we're headed. The trade part of this is easy to solve. I mean, there's all winners in the trade part of the equation. And I think this has been pointed out. We all win from economies of scale and playing to our natural strength. Certain countries are better at manufacturing certain goods or services than other countries, and they should export to those other countries. That's a win-win-win. No one's going to argue that. So we've seen basically 30 years of that. We've seen what it's done to poverty levels. We've seen what it's done to electrification in the world. That part of the equation is relatively easy to see. When it comes down to the technology side of the equation, this is going to be where all of the difficult decisions are made, because it's not going to be China versus the US, because things are going to be developed in the blockchain. The blockchain is going to create things. The cloud is going to create things. Where does the blockchain exist? Where does the cloud exist? It doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in the United States. And that's when this is going to get very difficult as sovereign nations try and protect sort of their technology or their cyber world. That's when it gets really difficult. The goods and services, this is easy stuff to fix.
But also that provide opportunity for both sides and for the whole world to work together, to figure out the new tech architecture for the whole world and governance structure as well.
Yeah, it has been said many times in this room, the world will be much stronger if we work together on one single platform. If we work on divided platforms, someone's going to fail miserably.
Right. This is a much more serious issue. Diana gave the most miserable forecast. But I'll come back to that issue. Now, Mr. Wang, you mentioned the supply chain.
Yeah.
What happened is, I mean, if you're looking for last year, FDI dropped dramatically from roughly 2017, $1.46 trillion to $1.2 trillion, 20% drop. This year so far, up to today, another 9% FDI drops. So that means the trade fraction brings a huge uncertainty and sort of a slow down investment, slow down the supply chain. Do you see the supply chain will change, or do you see the supply chain will continue with the globalization?
What, as I also mentioned yesterday, we probably see deglobalization from the global, working together to the regionalism. So we may see the globalization maybe breaking into several parts. We have a NAFTA, we have a US MSC, and then we have ASEAN, China, Southeast Asia, India, and Asia is emerging within itself. China is the largest trading partner with all its neighboring countries. And then we see EU probably getting together. So we may go back to the romance of three kingdoms. And then we have to really compete on a continental basis. And that is where I think China still has some advantage, because China has the largest homogeneous market, 1.4 billion people, 400 to 500 million middle class market. Also, the 1 billion smartphone users, the best infrastructure, largest speed rail networks in China.
So there's a tendency moving from globalization to the regionalization.
That's right.
To the regional supply chain. Diana, are you concerned the global supply chain were broken down?
Absolutely. But I think it will be an inevitable consequence of what we're seeing.
Inevitable,
and so the result is going to be higher cost push inflation, slowdown in technological advance and innovation. And also, I think what's extremely important to recognize is that we talked about free trade in goods, and I wouldn't say we have had free trade in services, so that was necessary. But the failure was, in the last 20 years, that we didn't have the free movement of capital. And China is opening inwards. It absolutely must open outwards and allow market forces to determine the exchange rate and its interest rates. It would have been a very different global story if in 2004, 2005, China had actually done that. I would even argue that we would not have had the global financial crisis.
Well, that's another point of both enjoy the domestic reform and also reforming the global supply chain. We still have a few minutes left. I think this is such an issue in everybody's mind. Everybody in the room can talk a half days. Is there any questions and comments anybody want to raise, or raise your hands? See what? Yes, George. Do we have a Mac? Do we have a Mac? No Mac. Do we have a Mac, or we're not? Oh, Mac is coming, George. Yes, please.
I come out of these 2 days as a European and an American, as the impression that Europe is completely evacuated from this debate.
So with all this talk about US and China, where's Europe? So you're European, please.
So my question is, no. Is there still enough strength in Europe to constitute something, I wouldn't say a buffer, but another pole of growth that would be sufficiently important to play a role and avoid the bipolarization, not so much of the tech world, but of the international trade?
Very important point, the role of Europe in this, not only trade fraction, but globalization.
So
Diana, no, Fred. Diana comes from Europe. Let's ask Diana talk first. Yes, please.
Yes, I do come from Europe, and it's very sad where Europe is, and we have to acknowledge two things. First of all, that in the technology race, it really is China and the US. Everyone else is so far behind, there's no way they're catching up, so there's no multipolar world emerging out of this. But also in the European case, we really have to acknowledge that without a political union, this euro area is not working. And so I throw the question back to you. Are we going to have a political union?
No.
Yeah, okay. That's also
Or maybe that's not done throwing the question back.
So that, but that
Fred?
is,
Yeah.
that is, look, I would have answered the question the exact same way. I think you would, in a normal functioning globe with certain powerful regions, if the US and China were fighting, someone would try and fill the void. You know, who would fill the void? You know, you've got India. They're still in this hyper growth wave. You've got Brazil, Latin America going the other way. So Europe would be the natural respondent here. Right. But I agree completely. You know, in the words of Jean-Claude Trichet, they're still seeing if this experiment, those are his words, not mine, if this experiment of the Eurozone is working. And it seems to me that the experiment is failing miserably because there's a huge opportunity, there's a huge void to be filled. And Europe should be filling it, but they can't even figure out how to create economic growth in a negative interest rate world in Europe right now. So filling a void seems far off their radar screen.
So that's a challenge. Fred, you want to jump in? Also, before that, you mentioned the WTO -1. Does that mean China and Europe should form a new WTO without the United States? What is your WTO -1?
What it means,
what is the role of Europe in this globalization?
So far from being neglect Europeans' role, I think Europeans essential, especially with the architect of the trading system is turning its back against the system. So it's very important for Europe, China, Japan, Canada and India and Brazil, many countries working together, just like what they have done in the Paris Treaty on climate change. So I mentioned I didn't neglect Europe. I said solidarity matters. Europe has a very big role to play. By the way, as Asian, I'm not as pessimistic as you, European, about Europe. I think Europe has a big role to play. In terms of WTO, the stake is very high. European Union may be a big market, but the demographics and the political arrangement, as Gary mentioned, the monetary. So Europe need China, Asia, and the WTO multilateral system to work, to function.
Once again, whether Europe and China can jointly build a WTO -1, as you mentioned in your opening remark.
No, the way it's not to include the US. It's very much like TPP. If at this particular moment Washington chooses to opt out, let it be. So the rest of the 11 countries still have TPP. So WTO is not about excluding the architect, which is the United States. But at this particular moment, China, Europe, the rest of the world should unite to reform, strengthen WTO. I'm sure Washington will change his mind to come back.
Fantastic point. Yes, please, gentlemen.
Zhumin, I'm from Australia, so I feel a long way away from this.
Okay, another continent.
But my comment, and I echo Henry Kissinger here, who twice at this conference has called for a different language for these discussions. I've heard so many analogies to war, to skirmishes, to the foothills of the next Cold War, to the trade Iron Curtain or the Silicon Curtain. And I do really think that it behoves the leaders of the world to find a better and more respectful dialogue and to avoid the battle cries that we're hearing so much of at the moment.
Yeah, Australia, most beautiful and peaceful countries want to have a peaceful solution. Don't even mention the concept of the war. That's a fantastic idea. Any other comments or questions or in the room? People want to raise your hands. The last one. Oh, we have a lady here. Fantastic. Yes, please.
Thank you. You talked about globalism moving into regionalism. And I think I agree that there are certain issues that can be dealt better by regionalism. For instance, cross-border movement of contaminated air. I know Europe has a treaty, regional treaty on this. Also, maybe fishing in certain sea area, and there are institutions to take care of that. But there are issues that can be dealt much better, as we all know, by globalism rather than regionalism. Climate change is one, and I think trade is another. You have talked about moving into regionalism as though that is easy. But for most Asian countries, the US, China is a big trader, But the US is, for most Asian countries, the second largest trader. And for some countries, they trade equally, just about equally between China and the US, with China and US. So you cannot, on trade, on the economic sphere, you cannot just move into regionalism. It is an economic imperative that both Eurasia and the US, the Pacific is the bridge, and the two continents have to be together. So I just would like to get your view on this.
So we need both regionalism and also globalism work together. I think that's also important. Now, we don't have the time left, but I would like to take roughly 5 minutes, give everyone 1 minute to looking forward in 2020 in terms of trade, in terms of globalization. Do you think we'll have a better year 2020? Things can move forward? You think we'll have more challenge way ahead of us? We start with Mr. Xu.
I cannot predict 2020, but I think there's something that 2020 in this year we have to do. We have talked a lot about challenges and issues, but what is important is how to prevent these issues and problems from happening. For example, technical war and trade war. For us, businesses and think tanks, we need to find a way to support government's policies to avoid so-called trade wars that we do not want to see. Wang Xiansheng.
We definitely want to go for global. I mean, it just at the current stage, if we really have to break into the Cold War, then maybe regionalism is the first step to rebuild the globalism. For example, TPP, RCEP, and all those things is really good. I think then, if that is get accepted among the countries, we can enlarge that. We can have FTAP, for example. So I think that, let's also not forget we have G20. We have Australia, Japan, every country is inside. And also we have G7. I mean, can we have a G8, including China, and also G9, G10? So I think we need to really think about that. We have many common challenges. Now we are exploring the outer space. So absolutely, we have to work together. And then we are in the same boat of this planet. And we have to really survive
Fred?
for each other.
2020?
What?
You are asking 2020?
Yeah.
The twin negative force of protectionism, populism has taken the world economy to such a rock bottom. So look next year, I can only feel optimistic, since it cannot get much worse, and only there's upward to look for.
Beautiful. Diana?
For full disclosure, I am a glass half full person. And if I was a policymaker, I will be using a different language. But as a forecaster, I see 2020 and 2021 as really dangerous years.
We have two different voices from podium. But so, Gary, you're the right person to conclude. What is your 2020?
I'm going to try and tie a bunch of concepts together here over the last couple of days. Trade really revolves around 4 main concepts. Education, which is basically creativity and innovation. Capital, availability of capital and cost of capital. Labor, availability of labor and cost of labor. And climate. Those are the 4 factors that really drive. If you've got a competitive advantage in one of those areas, you can out-trade someone. If you've got a competitive advantage in multiple of those areas, you can really out-trade somebody. If you tell me those areas are going to change, I'll tell you how optimistic or pessimistic I'm going to be. The one I see that there's probably the greatest agreement on, but the hardest to fix is climate. Okay. So as much as we all agree on climate, well, most of us agree on climate, it's the hardest to fix, as we saw by the unbelievable graphics that went up yesterday, how difficult it is to change 1 degree C. That's the one that's hard to change. The others are very, very difficult to change. I don't see a big change going on, so therefore I continue to see that we will continue to have fights because people will leverage their unfair or their competitive advantage in the world to try and grow their country at the expense of another country.
Wow. I think we had a really, really fascinating talk. I think the point is very clear, and before we move into more further sort of tech fraction, financial fractions, I think we should take this trade fraction seriously. Both US and China should sign the deal as soon as possible. I think that's all the view from panelists that makes it very clear. And I think that's number one. And number two, the globalization is for the whole world. It's not only US and China. The Europe is also important. Australia is also important. We need to bring the whole world work together. Looking for 2020, we do have different views about the future. But I think as Mr. Xu and Gary pointed out, let's grab the key issues, start working on it, so we will be able to create a better year in year 2020. Please join me, big hands for our excellent, excellent panelists.